All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon again, and thank you for joining us. My name is Adam Wenner, and I, along with my co-moderator, Shannon Duggan, are honored to host today's panel of former public servants turned private practitioners. Today's panel brings a wealth of experience navigating a surprisingly complicated journey, getting off the government's payroll. The purpose of today's event is to try and demystify that process and hopefully provide some practical pointers on launching a successful campaign, leveraging your expertise, and thinking through the very real challenge of finding a place that honors the values we all grow to appreciate while serving the government. But before we jump to the substance and the exciting conversation, I want to cut away for a brief moment to thank the FBA and its executive director, Mindy Herman, for providing both this platform and invaluable support for the event along the way. I also want to thank Shada Safapour, Senior Administrator at Honigman, for helping to bring this concept to life and get everyone in the room today. Before we get into the questions, I want to give one quick note about logistics. Everyone always says this at the top of these events, but this time we really mean it. This is intended to be an interactive program, and we really hope that folks that have questions we'll ask them as we kind of work through the dialogue. So to do that, the easiest way to do that is on the very bottom ribbon of the Zoom screen, you should see a button that says Q&A, and you can submit live questions through that function, and Shannon and I will see them. You can submit them anonymously, or you can submit them under your name, whichever you prefer. But it would be really great if we could get some participation along the way so that we make sure we're hitting what matters most to you. So with that, I will turn it over to Shannon to run through a brief introduction of our panelists. Shannon?
All right, and this goes without saying, but we could spend several minutes introducing each of today's panelists. But because our time is short, we'll have each panelist shortly introduce themselves and share a few highlights about their public service and what they're doing now in the private sector. The first on our panel is Matthew Schneider. Matthew, would you please introduce yourself?
I think you're muted, Matthew.
Did I kick it off the right way, Adam?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So I'm Matthew Schneider. I'm the former U.S. Attorney in Detroit. I've spent almost my entire career in government and public service, and now I'm in private practice.
Thank you, Matthew. And next on our panel is Alex Parrish. Alex, please take a few moments to introduce yourself to the group.
Thanks, Shannon. Yes, I'm Alex Parrish. I'm a partner in the corporate department at Honigman, and I co-lead the M&A practice there. But before coming to Honigman, I had 3 stints in government. I started out my last year of college and first year of law school. I was a legislative assistant to a U.S. senator in Washington, and then after law school, I clerked for a federal judge, Damon Keith, on the 6th Circuit here in Detroit. And then after that, I had a 4-year stint at the Pentagon, where I was assistant to the Secretary of the Army General Counsel that serves the Secretary of the Army and the Secretary of Defense. It was a great 4 years. Spent 4 years dealing with defense budget issues, weapons development, international matters. And I was part of a small group that actually oversaw the government's interests in merger and acquisition activity in the Defense Department. That's it, Shannon. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alex. Next on our panel is Mark Burton. Mark, would you please introduce yourself for the audience?
Sure. Thank you, Shannon. Much like Matthew, I've been in and around state government my entire career for about 20 years now. Most recently, upon joining Honigman, I was the president and CEO of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Prior to that, chief strategist for Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and with her in the legislature for a number of years before that. But legislative experience, executive branch experience, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you, Mark. And our final panelist is Maja Zion. Maja, please share a few words about your background for the group.
Thank you, Shannon. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. I am Maja Zion. I served as a deputy prosecutor in the state of Indiana, specifically Marion County and Vanderburgh County, for 4 years. And during my time as a prosecutor, I specialized in sex crimes and domestic violence, crimes involving domestic violence. And now I am an associate in the Labor and Employment Department at Honigman.
Thank you so much, Maja. And please join me in giving a warm welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for being here. And let's jump right into questions.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Alex, I'd like to start with you, and to the extent that others have comments on this question, please feel free to chime in. But Alex, at what point while you were in the Pentagon did you first start thinking about moving to the private sector? And can you give folks just a snapshot of what the early stages of your thought and search process looked like?
Okay. Well, Adam, in my case, I really intended to be in the private sector all along. I had a military obligation, which caused me to devote 4 years to government service at the Pentagon. So it was sort of a term limit on my experience there. So I knew after 4 years I'd be making a transition out of that office and most likely into the private sector. What I found in the 4 years was my government experience really influenced what I wanted to do once I entered the private sector. The work I did there had a lot of influence of what I became interested in. And for me, the real issue was, where to go. And my wife and I decided we didn't want to be in Washington, D.C. We wanted to live somewhere else. I wanted to have a New York style business practice. So we kind of consciously went through a number of cities and ended up in Detroit because there were 2 law firms that we wanted to work. We didn't want to be in the same law firm. So that was the process we went through. I know it's a little different experience than some of the other panelists, but that was mine.
Thank you, Alex. And Mark, I'm going to turn to you next. Kind of a similar question, but after your time in the MEDC and serving the governor, you could have taken your career many different directions. What made you choose a firm?
Thank you, Shannon. I think, as I mentioned, about 20 years in and around state government, there's really kind of 3 things. I think first is I actually loved the law. I loved law school. And I knew at some point I'd always get back to it, largely after my public service. But really, I have approached my career. I love being a creative problem solver. And I like doing hard things in the public policy space. And a big firm has provided me that opportunity to continue doing that. Secondly, I think this panel is a great reflection of what large law firms can offer, which is just a great collection of exceptional people who master their particular subject areas. So when you go back to my wanting to be a problem solver with hard things in the public arena, being able to pick up a phone or send an email to a colleague who has significant expertise in a variety of areas of the law was just really critical for me. So to be able to be in a firm that has access to experts like that, where I can continue to kind of do the work that I've done over 20 years or so of trying to solve problems, it's a remarkable fit, and I'm very happy I made the move.
Thanks, Mark. Matthew, somewhat of a turn on that question for you. You were serving as U.S. Attorney here in the Eastern District of Michigan, and your transition out of that office was perhaps part of the change in administration. When you sort of came to the conclusion that you'd be looking for kind of the next move, were you immediately focused on law firms? And if so, obviously that's where you ultimately ended up. What kind of qualities and features were you looking for in a firm?
Well, thanks, Adam. It's a good question, because I spent my whole career in public service, whether being the U.S. Attorney or an assistant U.S. Attorney or a state prosecutor or in the state Supreme Court, or I also worked in the White House in D.C. And at the end, I didn't have a choice. I had to leave public service because the administration changed, and that's just the way it goes. But fortunately, because of that, after the election, I had plenty of time to interview with several outstanding and great law firms in Michigan. And so what I was looking for were essentially three things. I wanted a place where I could grow my own practice. I wanted a place where people were there who I could work with and that did similar things to what I did. And also, I wanted a firm that was very fiscally, financially sound. And I think we're really blessed in Michigan because we have several firms that have all three of those things. So I transitioned from government to private practice as a partner. But what I would suggest, especially for the people who are clerks, who know that their term is coming to an end, or people who are going to go into a firm, I would suggest that you look at that second category. I would be looking at a firm where there are people there who do the kind of work that you'd like to do, and that the people are nice people that you can build friendships with, because you're going to be working with them a lot. And it's much easier when you can go to a place that already does the type of work that you enjoy, and you can bounce ideas off of people. And as I said, there's several good Michigan firms who do all of those things.
Thank you so much, Matthew. And you just hit on a number of things that a lot of people should look for when they're thinking about going to a firm. And I want to turn that question next to Maja, who started out in a prosecutor role and kind of made that transition a little bit earlier in her career. So Maja, there are a lot of great firms in this state, as Matthew just mentioned. How did you differentiate between firms when you were looking to transition to the private sector? And what were you considering as the most important qualities?
Oh man, that's a good question. So I had a long list of needs and wants. I was a new mom. So my daughter, when I started my search, my daughter was about 1 month old. So I knew I wanted to I knew I had a list of things that I wanted in a firm, but I had three main non-negotiables. And those non-negotiables pertain to me and my ability to promote myself and to engage with big firms. And the first thing was litigation. I have a skill that a lot of big firm attorneys, partners, associates don't have. I have tried lots of jury trials and several more bench trials. So my ability to go in court, feel comfortable, speak up, say things, objections, I wanted to make sure that whatever firm I went into had a great litigation department. Whether I ended up in the litigation department or I could market myself to that department, I wanted to make sure that the firm had attorneys that were actually going to court and not just settling on paper, and that the firm would find my skill set as a need and as a necessity. So that was one. The second thing was diversity. Moving from the prosecutor's office that I was at, I was the only Black prosecutor in the department, like in the prosecutor's office. So that affected me mentally, affected me socially, because being the only prosecutor in a city where it has the fourth largest population of African Americans in Indiana was an issue, especially where we lived. So I wanted to make sure that where I was going, I had people that looked like me, and I had a team that valued who I was as a Black female, and that was very important to me. And then the last thing I looked at was, or the last thing that was a non-negotiable was, what is the firm's reputation? And I automatically knew that hard work came with big firm. Hard work came with being a prosecutor. So when I heard people say, oh, you got tons of billable hours and oh, it's gonna be really hard, that didn't faze me. It's, how are the people? Are they nice? Do you like working with them? How is your trajectory to being partner? Is it fair? Is it on merit? Is it on based on your skill set? And when I spoke to female attorneys, I got a lot of varying opinions. And the firm that I chose was the firm that gave me comfort in their representation and reputation with females, especially African-American females. And those were my 3 non-negotiables. And I feel like I landed exactly where I needed to be.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, Maja, that you kind of run through your list of non-negotiables and kind of staying true to that. I think that's a great message for everybody trying to make this transition. And so kind of building off that, I actually want to ask a related question to you and Matthew. But Maja, why don't you start? And the question really is, as you're working through your list of non-negotiables, and you're at the prosecutor's office and you make that decision that I now want to go into private practice, what is your process? I think folks are really curious to learn, how do you make that initial step out? Is it dropping an application or resume in the mail? Is it sort of mechanically, what does that process look like? And then the second question is, can you walk us through sort of how you work through the various layers of that process to ultimately end up at a law firm?
So my process was interesting. As I said, I was a new mom, and I knew very early on throughout my pregnancy and even afterwards that it was time for me to leave. But I had to be strategic about it. And I think that individuals who are moving from state prosecutors' offices and even federal, being strategic is key, because you got to keep your job. You don't want them to know that you're leaving. You got to stay employed. And that was key for me. So first thing first is I started with just sending out applications. I joined as many listservs that advertised opportunities. I was not stuck in Indiana. My husband was willing to travel with me wherever I landed. So I sent out applications everywhere. The second thing I did was I networked like I never networked before. Yes, after being 1 month postpartum, I was out passing out my cards and saying my name and showing my face. And a lot of my network took place outside of the city that I was in. So it was a lot of weekends. It was a lot of getting off after court and driving straight to whatever city or flying out. It took a lot of energy, but I was willing to do it because I knew that I wanted out. The next thing that I think is key when you're going through, so sending out the applications cold or networking, I got a lot of responses through my network, and I ended up at the firm because of my network. But the next thing that is key is interviews, because like I said, you got to keep your job. So I did my interviews based on firms that would work with and understood. I was very upfront. There was no time to tell stories. Like, I'm still at a job. I'm still a prosecutor. I have a jury trial on these dates. I prefer to do my interviews in the mornings when I don't have court or on my non-court days. And that's how I set my interviews up with every firm. And if they didn't understand or they weren't willing to accommodate that, then there wasn't a firm that I needed to be at. And I did strike some off the list because you didn't understand. And that's fine with me. And then going through the interviews, I made sure that I was at home or I was in a private location if I was at work. And I completed my interviews over the phone or in person. And the last thing that I did was, when I had my offers on the table, I went old school and drew the little bubbles and did pros and cons where I wanted to end up. And when I ended up with 2 great firms, I went back to the numbers. What are the numbers? What are they offering? What are the negotiation points? Do I feel that in this negotiation process, I am being valued for what I am bringing? At times when I would talk to mentors and friends, they'd say, oh, just remember, you're just a state prosecutor. Oh, just remember, you don't have all the skills as a litigator or you don't have big firm experience. Strike all of that. You have the skill set as a state prosecutor or anything in government to be at a big firm. And if the firm that you're interviewing with does not value that, you don't need to be there. So the numbers spoke for me. And then also the last thing was the reputation. I called friends, I called family, I called people who used to work at the firm and people who are at the firm. And those 2 things, the numbers and the reputation, made me or allowed me to make the right decision. So that's my journey to big firm and how I made it through while still keeping my job as a prosecutor.
That's great, Maja. To say that there was some thoughtfulness and intentionality behind your process is probably a severe understatement. But that's super helpful and interesting, because that's exactly what folks have to work through to get to that next phase. I'm curious, Matthew, kind of building off that question. I imagine your process looked somewhat similar, although from a much different perspective, coming from a senior level and a very public facing position. I wonder if you could walk us through kind of your mechanics, kind of on the ground, to get a sense of how you navigated the process and ultimately decided the best fit for you.
Sure. My process was a bit different, and it's probably similar to what some of you are going through now because of COVID. Normally, there is a long recruitment process where you might have to meet with several partners, associates. You might have to fly to the different offices or travel to the different offices of the firm. I was able to do all of my interviews over Zoom, which was really awesome because I wore shorts or like jeans to every interview, which I might be doing now, by the way. It was really helpful. The thing that is similar, though, in this recruiting process for every law firm is that at a very base level, a law firm wants you to make money for the firm because law firms are businesses. So you should start thinking about it from that perspective. And that's what I did. Every firm wants you to have some sort of business plan that you can put together and explain to the firm. If I join your firm, here's what I bring to you. Here are the business contacts that I have. Here are my contacts in government. Here are the people that I know. Here are the potential clients that I could call. And that's difficult to do that. But you should be starting to think about, who is it that I could call to get to know a little bit better that might have business that I could bring into the firm, because that's something that all law firms are interested in.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Maja. Mark, one thing I'm curious about, and this builds off of the processes we just heard about for finding placement at a firm, and I'm sure many of our listeners are actually wondering about this too, is how to deal with the sensitivity with which you had to navigate your exit. I imagine there were some difficult conversations you had to have, and just care you had to take to not burn bridges on the way out. So could you talk to that a little bit?
Sure, happy to, Shannon. Yeah, my situation was a little different, and especially hearing, the sentiment of there are places with term limits, right, where your time will come to an end and you need to leave. I was kind of the reverse of that. I could have stayed with this current administration here in Michigan for a number of years yet to come, but I chose to move and to seek greener pastures, as they say. The difficult part in that, particularly around a place like the governor's office and close advisor to the governor, is you want to be able to preserve A, your integrity, and B, your relationship with in my case, the governor. I cherish that relationship. I've known and worked with her for nearly my entire career. So that's just a delicate balance. It's a real delicate balance, because when it comes to the first phone call that you have with a prospective firm, there is risk inherent there, right? That a partner may talk to another partner who may talk to another partner, and pretty soon the governor finds out before I had an opportunity to tell her that I've chosen my time to leave. So you always got to be hypersensitive, I think, to that, particularly, like I said, in my place, but I'm sure everybody else would say the same. It is something that you have to take great care, because those are relationships that are professional, in my case, personal and professional, with her over such a long period of time. And undermining that in any way could potentially make the job opportunity not worth it. So you need to be strategic about that. You need to have confidence that the people that you do talk to on the other side understand that too, so that you can establish that trust right away and be able to have meaningful conversations and a meaningful process and end up getting enough information to be able to make a decision that's in your best interest.
Thank you, Mark. It's helpful to hear from your perspective how those conversations go and kind of what you're thinking about as you make those decisions. And that ties right into my next question for Maja, and I'll also turn it to Mark afterwards to address what were the most challenging parts of your private sector job search? Maja, would you take that one first?
Yeah, so my most challenging part was the travel and getting from one interview to another while still maintaining a court docket and especially a trial court docket. I don't know, but if there are prosecutors on here in my state, the judges would set maybe 4 or 5 jury trials. And if one settled the morning of, then whoever was number 2 would be up, and whoever number 3 would be up. So it was very unpredictable if you were going to trial or not, and you always had to be prepared. And navigating my schedule at work and trying to make sure I incorporated that I adequately informed my firms and the interviews and set those schedules correctly was a very hard thing. And I think the second part was that I was a new mom, and making sure that I took care of my daughter and I took care of my husband and my household. Those are 2 things. Those are 2 things that are extremely important to me, and making sure that the job search and maintaining my current job did not get into the way of my home life was very important. And I think that those were the 2 parts that was really hard.
Absolutely.
Shannon.
Oh yeah, I was
Shannon.
just going to invite Mark to talk.
Yeah, Shannon, for me, you know, I mean, I think the phrase you used was challenging parts of this transition process. And, you know, I think really for me, the most challenging part was making the decision that it was time for me to leave. Because the governor, you know, and as president and CEO of MEDC, you're obviously, you know, on the cabinet. So while I was not in the governor's office, my proximity really didn't change. But making that decision when the governor from today forward, right, has at least 18 months in her current term, let alone prospectively another 4-year term after that. So just getting over that hurdle that I wanted to leave was the most challenging part for me. Other than that, you know, when it came to prospective places to go, when you're when you sort of grow up in the legislature and state government, in the governor's office as CEO of MEDC, over the course of time, I've worked with any and all firms across the state in one capacity or another. So that part, I had the familiarity in terms of the different firms, the people at the different firms, some of the philosophies of the firms. So that part I did not consider nearly the challenge it was to make the decision to move at all.
Yeah, that's really helpful perspective, guys. And I'm curious, Alex, you know, when we talk about challenges, you mentioned a couple of things at the top in terms of geography and in terms of finding the firm that sort of, you know, fit the profile you were looking for. You know, what other things out of a firm, particularly after, you know, coming off a distinguished government career, being at the Pentagon, clerking for a 6th Circuit judge, you know, you've got a skill set that's really, you know, kind of unique. But unique to the space that you're working in, and not necessarily a one-to-one kind of transfer to a private, you know, big law firm. I wonder what you thought about in terms of, you know, Maja called it her non-negotiables. What things were you thinking about in terms of picking a firm that you could build, you know, really build a career at?
Yeah, Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I was coming out of the government, Adam, really as a fifth-year lawyer, right? Clerked for a year, and then I spent 4 years at the Pentagon. And in those 5 years, I picked up a lot of really invaluable experience. On the other hand, I needed some training and development. That there were basic skills that are required in the private sector that I didn't have the opportunity to pick up. So I knew how to do lots of great things. I had great experiences. On the other hand, I needed some training and development. So finding a place that valued the experiences that you have in the government, and also being willing and having the capacity to provide the training and development, that was a combination that I was looking for, and not all law firms had. There were firms that didn't value the government experience, wanted you to start all over, willing to train and develop you. But, I thought my government experience was really valuable. And so those firms were low on my list. And then there were firms, particularly in Washington, where they didn't care about all the other stuff. They valued the government contacts, those experiences. I thought that locked you into a career trajectory that I didn't really want. So there were several firms around the country, not that many though, that offer that, and that was really high on my list. It wasn't a non-negotiable for me because I sort of came to the realization during the process that was important. But that's the thing I would point out, Adam.
Yeah, I know that sounds exactly right, Alex, and particularly to think about sort of what the firm can offer you from a skill building perspective, because we all like to think that when we come from the government that it's a one-way kind of thing, and we're the ones offering all of the expertise. But you're exactly right that the transfer there is not one-to-one, and so you do need to find a place that is willing to kind of spend the time to help you make that leap to private practice. So that makes a lot of sense. So Matthew and Mark, when we talk about challenges of finding the right fit, one thing that I have to imagine is perhaps unique to you both is the challenge of navigating conflicts, which many, I imagine, senior government officials have to deal with as they integrate into a new firm and think through kind of what their practice is going to look like. Matthew, why don't we start with you? Can you talk to us about the things that you thought about on the front end before you decided where to go? And now that you've found a home, how has that conflicts process played out kind of present day?
So the conflicts process, it's a little bit harder than I thought, because once you're representing the government and then you're on the other side, that creates a conflict in certain cases. The best advice that I can give to you is to make sure that you get to know your ethics officer very well, and also to reread the ethics rules, those Michigan rules of professional conduct, and make sure that you follow them and understand them. Because coming from the government, there's going to be a window of time, a ban, where you'll be prohibited from interacting with the people that you used to work with. And knowing exactly what that ban means, knowing how long that ban will last and what circumstances, and knowing that you shouldn't solve that problem on your own. You should get advice from either your former employer. I've sought advice from the Justice Department about whether I can work on cases, or your current employer, or both, to make sure that you've got somebody else who's going to cover you in case you haven't read the rules correctly.
That makes a lot of sense. And Mark, curious to hear your perspective. I know obviously in your position, you're working through, or we're formerly working through a lot of, big time financial decisions and grants and things like that for businesses on behalf of the governor's office. Is there anything that you've sort of learned along the way, and can you give our our viewers any tips on navigating that process from your role?
Sure, Adam. A couple things. First thing I'll say up front is, I think through the conflict analysis process, you actually learn quite a bit about the firm and what they value and whether those values line up with yours. So it's very, it provides great visibility, I think, into that as someone who's being recruited. In my particular case, while I have been a lawyer, I was not a lawyer. As you know, I was a chief strategist for the governor. I was chief of staff for the governor. And then I was president and CEO at the Economic Development Corporation. So I was not an in-house lawyer for either one of those, or obviously in the state attorney general's office. So that provided different challenges, I think, that are not as clear cut, because certainly, you know, the governor is involved in highly sensitive, privileged conversations in many instances, as governor, and I being right there with her, had obviously access to information. So whether I was a lawyer or not, that had to be considered. And as far as the Economic Development Corporation is concerned, you know, similar challenges over there, because as CEO, you know, I'm the final signee on so many things that happen in that great place. So while I was not a lawyer per se in either of those entities, it was a really interesting process to go through the different issue areas, different circumstances, and kind of analyze them. But I'll just end with what I started with, which was, I thought the process was a wonderful test of values before I even, you know, sign the dotted line, as they say.
Thank you, Mark. That's a really interesting perspective, and Matthew too, for sharing both of your perspectives on how conflicts go. And I'll just take this opportunity to remind all of our listeners that if you have a question for us, please place it in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to it by the end of the panel. Turning now to, I'm going to turn to Alex and Maja. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the trade-offs that you made when you transitioned from government work to the firm? Obviously, salaries look a little bit different on the private side, but any other trade-offs that you had to consider when you made the decision to leave the public side?
Let me just say it was an adjustment going from the Defense Department to a law firm. You know, I in the government, you know, I was dealing on a daily basis with you know, the Secretary of the Army and high-ranking government officials, and the matters that came into that office, I mean, unless they were 10-figure amounts, that was something we didn't spend a lot of time on. So it had to be, you know, very large, complicated matters. And so I was doing that one week, and then the next week I was working probably 4 levels away from the client, doing very simple due diligence kind of assignments, learning how to draft contracts. And that was an adjustment. I went into it knowing I had to do that. I had to go back to the beginning and learn some stuff. And you know, the nice thing was I was at a firm that allowed you to make the transition from that sort of beginning level to a more advanced level on an accelerated basis. I don't know if I could have continued to do that beginning kind of work for 4 or 5 or 7 or 8 years, which is the case in some places. But it was an adjustment you had to make, and that was probably the most significant one.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. I would say autonomy for me, in summarizing it from Alex's perspective, being a state prosecutor, I had a lot of autonomy. I remember coming in as a new attorney, fresh out of law school, just passed the bar, and they just gave me 30 cases and said, here you go to court. And the only time I was really going to a supervisor was to talk about trial strategy, to ask questions, but those cases were mine, and I worked them from beginning to end, investigating, preparing for tape statements. That I had the autonomy. I ran those cases, and If there was a brief needed to be written, there was no partner to review it or a senior associate to review it. It was all on me, and I handled it from beginning to end. Coming to a firm, it is a team effort. And I was the low man on the totem pole. So things that I was just not used to, as in submitting my work to anyone, or having someone review something that I did, and having that feedback called red lines. Oh, that was an adjustment. To learn that all the things that you thought you knew, you really didn't. And there was a new way to work, and a new way to process and to think and to explain. That was a huge adjustment, going from being not necessarily my own boss, but working my own cases, to working a case that is where I am the third man. There's a partner, there's a senior associate, and then there's me. That was really difficult to handle and to adjust to. But once I realized that nothing should be taken personally and everything was for the betterment of me growing as an attorney and my success at the firm, the lack of autonomy went out the door, because you slowly get to become your own boss, and you slowly get to doing these cases on your own and handling clients on your own. And that change, that slow adjustment, really helped me to where I am now, where I can handle a case where it's just me and the senior partner, and we can work through it, and he can trust me to turn in documents or to deal with opposing counsel on my own. And I enjoyed that buildup. But when I first got here at the firm, it was very difficult. So get ready. I think another difficult transition, or something that caught me off guard, which I knew of, but it was still hard to actually work through, was that work-life balance. We talk about it so much. I am a millennial. I ain't gonna hide it. And I love work-life balance. And as a prosecutor, I had that, except for the times where I had jury trials. I didn't really stay at the office until 6, 9, 10 o'clock at night. I was in and out 9 to 5, and I went home and I spent time with my husband. And when I got to spend time with my daughter, I did. Coming to the firm, that work-life balance is there, but you have to create it. And I remember, I can't remember if it was Alex or if it was another partner at the firm, but they told me, they said, don't start anything or don't accept something that you can't maintain or you can't finish. And that was talking about my work-life balance. Don't come in staying until 9, 10 o'clock when you know you can't maintain that. Establish who you are, what you want your partners and what you want your colleagues to know about you when it comes to your work-life balance, and incorporate that into your job. And I think transitioning and learning how to manage my time as an associate, and making sure that I still fulfill my duties as a wife and a mom was a very difficult transition, but I did make it, and it is possible to do. So I would say the lack of autonomy when you first start as an associate, and that figuring out how to create the work-life balance that you can sustain were the two biggest things that I had to transition into.
Thanks, Maja. You raise an interesting point about teams and how, when you are in government practice, sometimes it's a one-man army, and then you come to a big firm and the army gets a little bit bigger when you're working on matters. Matthew, when we think about changing that perspective, going from, particularly in your case, a really long sort of distinguished career in government service to representing the public, representing the people, and now you're switching hats and you're representing private clients. Kind of a two-part question. First, for you personally, has the team aspect of practice changed at all? Do you find that it's the same or perhaps different from the government practice in terms of the amount of people that you're working on in a given matter? And kind of a corollary, has it been hard for you to make that hatch, to change hats and to go from, representing the public interest to giving business advice and advocating for a client for a particular outcome?
It hasn't been difficult for me, and I feel very blessed because of that. I think the team aspect is very similar, and I think it's been a very easy transition. And I really, really enjoy this work. I think what people should be thinking about is when you're going to make that transition, you have to be thinking about it in terms of what can you provide to the law firm. So let me give you a couple of examples. Like if you're a clerk and you go to a firm, you're immediately going to be recognized as that person knows the judge and they know how the judge thinks and they know that person is valuable. And the same thing is true with the government. So, every week I get a call from 2 or 3 of my colleagues who have some issue with a civil client who has some criminal jeopardy. I mean, that's easy for me to handle. But if you've spent your career negotiating real estate deals, you have no idea what to do when the FBI calls your client. And that's something that you might have that you can bring to the law firm that is a benefit. So let me end by saying, when you're applying to a law firm, you should be thinking about what is it in my background that makes me unique and makes me valuable to the firm, and try to find a way to explain that to the firm, because you want the firm to be in the position of thinking, I want that person in my office because of their insight or their government expertise or their knowledge of the judges. So if you can get the firm to think that they want you rather than you just wanting them, your law firm pursuits are going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Matthew, particularly as you talk about kind of leveraging your background and trying to sell your story to whatever comes next for you. I'm gonna flip the script a bit and actually ask a question of Shannon, because I know we have a number of law clerks listening in today. And I wonder, Shannon, now you clerked for a federal judge on the East Coast. So kind of that knowledge of that particular judge, we're largely when you're at largely a Michigan-based firm is maybe not quite as beneficial as if you were on the East Coast. But I wonder if you could speak to some of the other intangibles that you've leveraged about your background as a law clerk to the benefit of the firm.
Absolutely, Adam, and thank you for the question. It is a little bit unorthodox, I think, to have a clerkship out of state and then come back to a firm based in Detroit. But I'll say that for me, coming in as a young lawyer, there were 2 things that were really great about having the clerkship under my belt when I came in. One is that I was a much more confident lawyer than I was when I graduated law school. Having a year working with a judge, handling cases start to finish, just me and him, really, made me kind of speed up my skill development in that year as a clerk. And it made me more confident to just know that I can handle tough cases, tough issues, know how to present them, work them out in a conversation with somebody like a judge, or, in the future at the firm, somebody like a partner. The other thing that was really invaluable coming in, just the writing experience, and any clerk will tell you that they just become so much better of a writer than they were when they started under the judge's guidance. So coming in as a young lawyer, having the confidence and the writing skills that I might not have had honed as well when I graduated law school was great, just for getting my foot in the door and getting the assignments and the types of matters I wanted when I started off at the firm. I think in terms of leveraging my clerkship that was in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania in Michigan, I think, at the firm, and Matthew touched on this, but there are just things about having clerked that give you a little bit of an insight that you might not have otherwise. I get questions from my colleagues pretty often about how would a judge think about the way we're framing this issue? How would a judge think about whether we if we bring this motion or not, that kind of thing. So, and it is helpful to have that experience of being with the judge when they get that motion or they get that issue presented in that way, and having been in the room talking to the judge about, their gut reaction to things like that. So, so that is just a benefit that translates no matter where you clerk, I think. And that's been really helpful for me in my early career.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, interesting to think about the intangibles that you bring and the uniqueness of the role being on the inside and having that perspective, which certainly, career firm lawyers just don't have. Alex, your path was a little unorthodox in the sense that you were doing corporate work principally for the government after your clerkship, and then you joined a firm. Did you think about or have you leveraged that, your federal government experience, particularly at the Pentagon, in your private practice in any way? I mean, I imagine it's nice to be able to tell clients you work at the Pentagon, and that has a certain appeal to it. But on a more practical level, have you found kind of any ties there?
I would say, Adam, early in my career, yes. Early in the career, I did, some work for defense contractor clients that had business issues. They found their way to me because of that government experience. The people I met in the government were referral sources, so that was helpful. But I made the decision not to really optimize the opportunity to leverage that experience directly. If I had stayed in Washington, D.C., I could have easily transitioned into a government contract-oriented business. Or if I joined a defense contractor in their corporate department, it would have been a more direct path. But I think, everyone who's thinking about, transitioning from government to private practice really needs to also think about what is it that they want to do with the rest of their lives. And, not necessarily limit yourself to what you're directly doing in government. And that's what I did. And so I ended up, over the course of my career, I've had some direct, involvement in things that were very similar to what I did in government, but I really wanted to expand beyond that. And so that's been my experience, Adam.
Thanks, Alex.
Adam and Shannon, if I can just chime in real quick.
Of course.
So speaking to anyone out there who did not work for the Pentagon or, the U.S. Attorney's Office or a governor, it is from like a small town in Evansville, Indiana, right? Like speaking to those people, you still have major skill sets that a law firm is looking for. If you were a state prosecutor, you know how to interview someone and you know how to catch someone in a lie better than most people. You can smell a lie coming from south, north, east, west, all the points. You know that. You know how to engage with individuals who don't want to talk to you, who don't want to share the information. So use those interview skills. You know also how to deal with opposing counsel who think they smarter than they mamas, but don't know anything from the top of their feet to the bottom of their shoe. Like they just don't know. But that's what you're going to encounter in the big firm world. You're going to encounter opposing counsel that just, you like, how did you graduate law school? But you know how to talk to them. You know how to befriend them. You know how to engage with them to get what you want. Those are skill sets that you can leverage to a big firm. If you are going into it, you're going to be nervous. You're going to be scared. But remember that you have skill sets that lots of attorneys at big firms do not have. So get creative and figure out how you can use those skill sets that you have to leverage yourself and to maximize your abilities to a big firm. Don't feel like because you haven't done these big time jobs or because you don't have these, I don't know how to describe these experiences that are just wonderful that I never had, but you still can make it here. So please get creative with your skill sets and know that they are wanted and needed at big firms. Just want to throw that out there.
Thank you so much, Maja, for doing that. And that's actually a perfect transition into our final question. I'm going to open this up to the whole panel. What advice do you have for lawyers of any age who are thinking about moving from the public sphere to the private sector? What words of wisdom do you have for our listeners today?
Let me add something to that, Shannon, to answer that question. The one thing I was worried about, I did not want to go into private practice because I had not done that before. And I was worried about billing hours. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be so hard. It's not, it's easy. You just you do the work and write it down. I have found that to be so simple. And so don't be afraid of the billable hour. It hasn't impacted me much at all.
I guess the thing I would say, Shannon, is I would encourage people to, consider making the move. Tons and tons of people are doing it every year. There's no reason why you can't. And they're doing it at all levels, from the law clerk level all the way up to very senior lawyers. I agree with Maja. All of them have, great experiences and skill sets that can be valuable to firms. And the firms are changing. The people are moving in out of firms at a greater velocity. I think the firms are getting more creative about where they're looking for talent. It's a great time for a government lawyer to be looking at a law firm. And the thing I would say, government practice is wonderful. It really is. But I think there are many advantages to being in the private sector. And it's not just money. I mean, the money is important, but there are many other advantages. The opportunity to serve your community are great in the private sector. The independence and the flexibility that the private sector provides is really important. And and then for many people in government, they just don't have the ability to dictate how long they'll stay in service. So I think it's incumbent upon people to be looking at those opportunities.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. Look, at the end of the day, you are going to hear people say, it's hard, it's a lot of work, you won't have work-life balance, it's not easy going from state prosecutor or state defense attorney to big firm. Block all of those out and hear my voice when I say it's possible. It is so possible. You can do it. The billable hours are an adjustment, but it's possible that you can bill hours and have a 6-month-old. When I finally did land where I am, land a job at Honigman, my daughter was 6 months old. Now she's 3 years old, and I hope to have another child someday while I'm still at this firm, and I hope to build my career at this firm. So you can do it. Just remember that it is up to you to get creative. It is up to you to step out on faith or whatever you believe in, but step out and believe in yourself. And it's up to you to do the work. The work is here. The time, the billable hours are here at big firms. You have to be willing to do the work. And the last thing I'll say is remember that quote that I said earlier. I think it was by Alex, but don't start anything you can't maintain or finish. So when it's time for you to start at a big firm, establish what you know you can do. One of my biggest things is reading a book to my daughter at night. Now, sometimes I had fallen asleep while reading Clifford the Big Red Dog, and my daughter has had to nudge me and say, Mommy, wake up. But I know, and I think my colleagues know that from a certain time between 8 to 8:30, Maja's not going to be online because she's going to be reading to her daughter. Whether that's me falling asleep or actually reading the book, 8 to 8:30 is my daughter's time. So you can accomplish it. You can get into a big firm. It is possible, and you can have your work-life balance while you're still at a big firm. So I say, do it. Take the leap of faith. Hope to see y'all soon at big firms.
Shannon, I'll just add one thing. As I know we're at 101 already. I sought public service so that I could make an impact. And at first it was my community. And then obviously after that it grew. And I have cherished that ability for the private sector to provide me the opportunity to make an impact. But there's also a recognition that government and politics are changing, are evolving. But so is the private sector, and Alex touched on this too. You know, if you embrace the opportunity that the private sector provides, you can stay true to your value, and I think you will have a as good or greater opportunity to continue to provide impact and leadership on issues that you care about, potentially over a lot longer period of time. So I think everybody's advice has been excellent. But if that's why you got into public sector to begin with, you can always continue that in the private sector. So I encourage you, like everybody else, to reach out. I think any of us would be happy to talk to anybody, listening today. But start having some of those conversations and make the jump if you want to.
Thank you so much, Mark. That's an excellent note to end on. I want to thank our panelists, Mark, Alex, Matthew, and Maja, for what has been a tremendously informative discussion. And I'd like to thank all of our attendees as well. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to join us. Have a wonderful week and take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.